Bueno, buenos días. Vamos a proceder a la presentación del ponente principal en la conferencia de inauguración. And so we're going to do this in both languages, in both Spanish and English. And it is my pleasure to introduce you today to Professor Gerry McCroke, Professor of Education and Head of the School in the Schooling, National University of Ireland, Galway. Gerry McCroke is the established Professor of Education and Head of a School in the Schooling, National University of Ireland, Galway. Previously, Gerry was a teacher, school inspector and associate professor in the School of Education in University College Dublin. He had designed, developed and directed a number of graduate programs in education, including 2 innovative online blended courses on school leadership, a 1-year part-time professional diploma in educational studies, leadership, and a 2-year part-time MEd leadership also. Gerry has also had a fellowship in teaching and academic development and is a lead partner in consortium of 3 universities, the National University of Ireland, the University College of Dublin, and the University of Limerick, and that won the Department of Education and Skills and Center for School Leadership tender to design and teach a postgraduate diploma in school leadership, as well as a linked and blended version of the program for Irish medium schools hosted by the School of Education at the NUI Galway. Well, we have 45 minutes, more or less, for this presentation, and then we will have 15 minutes for the debate. In case you have any doubts or you want to do your presentations and questions in both Spanish or English, or you have any questions with English or any doubts, it will be my pleasure. So now we have, and I have the honor of presenting and introducing Dr. Gerry McCroke. Please.
Gracias. Hola, buenos días. Here. Gracias por invitarme a Granada para hablar con vosotros vosotras. Thank you. We need. Yes, I'll go here. Yeah. Is this okay? Is this okay? Okay. I am very concerned that I only speak English, so I don't speak Spanish, so you need to tell me to slow down if I go too fast. Okay? So with somebody, all you need to do is just go, calm down. And if you say that, I'd see you. So if you feel I'm going too fast, just say, take it easy, and I will. Today, it is my pleasure to talk to you about something that I believe very strongly in. It's about inclusive practice in schools and the leadership of that. Many of you, I think, many of you that come to this conference work in the area of special education, yes? Yeah. You see, you're the choir. You are the ones who already know a lot of this. You are the ones for whom inclusive practice is what you do every single day when you're in school, because essentially your work is about inclusion. So you as a group of teachers and a group of professionals, in my view, play a real central role. In many schools, the main role, the most important role in the leadership of inclusive practice in schools. So you are leaders because you understand this. You are working with students in a very specific way around difference. So your understanding of difference and your understanding of inclusion is very well developed. Probably, maybe not exclusively, but probably more developed than many of your colleagues that you work with, who think they're not dealing with the level of difference you're dealing with. So your role in schools, I would argue, is very important in terms of the leadership of this particular part of what we do. I'm going to start slide through because I have a lot of slides here. I will talk a little bit about leadership broadly of this, and I'll explain it in a second. I'm going to talk especially about working in schools with difference and diversity. Also, a piece then on the implications of this for school leaders, including everybody in the school who works there, and some questions and comments. One of the things I think that's important in relation to this topic is the language related to dealing with inclusion, to working with inclusion, to leading inclusion in schools. And when I'm talking about leadership here, I'm not just talking about the principal in the school, I'm not just talking about individual teachers, I'm actually talking about everybody. I think when we're talking about leadership here, we are talking about what goes on, first of all, in here, in your hearts. Because we are working with, I think sometimes we forget that it's children and young people we're working with. And if they don't work in here, if they don't make sense in here, in your heart, then they really don't make sense at all. You have to feel young children. You have to link in with them here first. This is why I think this is beautiful. Your picture. When I saw it yesterday, I thought, yes, it's about kids, it's about fun, it's about difference, it's about children who are very special, and they're growing up in front of us in our schools, and that's really important. So we have to think about leading from here. Yes, we need to lead from in our heads as well, our thinking, the way we think about inclusion, the way we think about children and young people, the way we think about our teaching, the way we think about our practice. Yes, we need to move that on. That needs to be led, we need to lead it into a space that is more inclusive. And also, that in terms of what we do. There's no point feeling it, there's no point thinking it, if we do nothing with it. So, it's about everything, hearts, minds, and action. The problem with inclusion as an idea and as a concept is it's different for so many people. It's very contested. Some people agree with it, some people don't agree with it, some people want it a little bit, some people want it a lot. So that makes it a very difficult space to work in. That doesn't mean we don't work in it, it just means we recognize that when I talk about inclusion, maybe it means something to what you think when you think about inclusion. Inclusion means something different in different schools. Because I think one of the things we have to recognize, and certainly in Irish schools, I would imagine it's the same here, every school has its own feel, its own culture, its own way of working. And that's maybe strange because we're all teaching children, we're all working with the same curriculum, more or less, but yet a school feels very different. I don't know, for people going in and out of schools, you will see. I know I'm in and out of schools with student teachers and practicing teachers almost every day. And you walk inside the door of a school, and then it's like, you can see the pictures on the walls, you can see the way people speak to you, you can see where children are, you can feel immediately the kind of school that we have here. There are similarities and differences, there are similarities of course, but every school has its own unique way of working. That's because you have a collection of people working together. They create their own dynamic, but they also create their own dynamic around inclusion. And we need to recognize, I think, that some schools get things to a point. We have a way of working here now. We have this, we understand what we need to do, everything is okay. And we really don't want anything to change that. We don't want anything to disrupt that. And that sometimes can be a problem, because when we start saying, oh, we should do something different, it's like, but we're going to, now it's not going to be the same anymore, and I like it the way it is, and I don't want it to be different. So that can be a problem. So I think what we need to do when we're working with inclusion is open up conversations. And we definitely need to move away from this is right and this is wrong. That binary is not good in schools. It is not good with inclusion, and it is not good for children and young people. to be that absolute right, wrong. Because it closes off so many conversations. It closes off discussion, it closes off dialogue, and we need to talk about this particular part of our practice. Talk, think differently, move our thinking on, and the only way we do that is if we move away from these. Oh, I need this to be okay. I need this finished. Stop talking now. Tell me what to do. No. I'll tell you what to do now. Or let's think about what you could do. But maybe next year we will think differently about it. We get a new student with a different way of looking at the world. Then we look differently at that student. It changes our school. We need to open up that, what I call discursive strategies to open up dialogue. There are many discursive strategies in our school that close things down. I'll give you some of them, especially in relation to inclusion. That will never work. That's way too idealistic. But that might work in that school, but it won't work here. No, our school is different. No, it couldn't. All of these things are saying, no, we're shut, stop talking. And the other thing is, conclusive answers and positions are not always there, which is kind of leading on to that. So, in my view, leadership at all its levels, and I'm just going to look at the blue writing here at times, it needs to line up hearts, minds, purposes, and resources. All of those need to move in the same direction towards achieving a more inclusive type of school experience for all our students. Not just the students with special education needs, for everyone, for all our students in our schools. Now, some of you will recognize this. We've come, particularly with special education, we have come on this journey for many years now. We had exclusion. Like, it is not that long ago in Ireland, I don't know what happens in Spain, but it is not that long ago in Ireland that children and young people with severe, profound learning difficulties, maybe who couldn't hear or couldn't see and who had some mobility issues, were in a hospital. And they spent all of their lives in a hospital. And they were never taught. They just lay in a bed, sat on a chair, and that was it for their whole lives. There would have been people who were, if they were born who are now my age in their 50s, whose lives were in hospital. They never saw schools. They were excluded in the most extreme way. We would have situations, families who might have had a child with a disability who never let that child outside their house, who never brought that child anywhere. That child stayed at home, never went to school, never went anywhere with the family. Was a kind of, I don't know if it was, sometimes it was shame. You understand shame? People were embarrassed. Maybe it seemed like there was something wrong with the family if you had a child who'd had a disability. That is in my memory, and I'm not that old. You know, I remember families like that. The other issue, then we moved to a situation where we had separation. Separation being special school and a mainstream school. You probably still have that. The other aspect is where we would have integration, where we have children with special education needs, or children not with special education needs, all working, but integrated to some degree, but still separated. And then we move to inclusion, which is that notion of a very mixed, diverse group. The issue with language, though, is that we still have ways of thinking that come from that space. We have ways of talking about difference, not just special education. We have ways of talking about difference that is exclusionary still. I'll keep going. We have ways of talking about difference that involves us thinking about separation. Moving children, like we have a situation because we have changed, our demographic in Ireland has changed so much, so quickly. We now have a situation that we have schools in Ireland that are predominantly white and Catholic, and other schools in Ireland that are predominantly mixed race and mixed religion. And they're different. They might be one school at one side of a city, or one side of a town, on the other side at the other, completely different populations, one predominantly white, one predominantly black, and different races, mainly black, which is crazy stuff. But our system wasn't ready for the change, and suddenly we end up with many, many children, no school, build a new school, and all the new children go to the new school, and we end up with essentially a mixed race school and a white school. Crazy stuff. But that's, so we still have separation. Some people think that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, according to some people. And then we have integration, and these two are very often mixed up. We talk about inclusion, we mean this. We talk about integration, well, we talk about inclusion, we mean this. We rarely talk about inclusion, and we rarely talk about integration and mean that. This is easier. This bit is getting harder and harder, because it challenges so many of the things that are well in place, many of the practices that are well established. Okay, so again, we have multiple perspectives on inclusion. Some of those you would be familiar with. The human rights perspective. This is the biggest one, our response to children with special education needs. That's where really the debate. Now we're talking about marginalized groups, and then we're talking about the bigger issue. And this is where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the point where we don't just need to transform our education systems for children with special education needs or for children from marginalized groups. We need to transform our education system because we need to do it. Because for too long, our education system has created winners and losers, and very often, always in the same place, for the same groups. For white working class boys in America, for black children across the board. In most countries, for the poor. In most countries, with very little exception. The patterns are very well established, and the problem is they are very, very persistent. They have been there, and they continue to be there for a long time. So clearly, for some, our system works really, really well. For all of us here, sitting in front of us, all of us in this university, the system has worked brilliantly. But there are many, many for whom it just does not work. And how long more do we keep doing the same thing and expecting, arguably, to get different results? We aren't going to get different results until we actually start fundamentally thinking differently about what we do in schools. And in my view, thinking within an inclusive framework, looking at inclusion as your way, as your guiding principle, you can actually create a different kind of school. So I'm just going, there's one thing there. Roger Slee, who writes just the blue writing, don't mind the black stuff on this, just go for the blue writing most of the time. He talks about, and I think this is a lovely idea, reconceptualization and radical reconstruction. Fixing little bits is not enough. We have been changing our school systems since we started our school systems. But all we're doing is changing more or less the same thing to a version of the same thing. So we keep changing, keep reforming, and still stay in the same place. We need to go more radical. We need a much more radical, as they call, reconceptualization. I like Slee's notion of that, an Australian man. So what I'm saying is, if we're doing this, in my view, we can look at it in two different ways. So we'd move inclusion out of the way for a while because it's so complicated. And if we just think about what schools do with difference, first of all, what happens to difference in our schools? And the other thing is, we need to problematize forms of exclusion. And I'm not just talking about throwing kids out because they don't behave well. I'm talking about the way exclusion is built into many of the practices that happen in our schools. And we need to sort of open our eyes. We need a lens, a big lens that has sort of what you call it, like a search for exclusion, and get around there and find the places, the thinking, the ideas, the practices that actually move people to the side, that exclude people in a range of different ways. So, I mean, it's almost axiomatic to say we're all different. And yet we are all different. And what do we do with that when we get it into schools? So what I'm arguing for here is a critical approach to difference. And it's not just the difference we want to talk about. It's all of the difference. And that might mean you're not comfortable with some of it. If you are a teacher, I don't care personally what you believe in. I do care professionally what you do. You have a professional responsibility, irrespective of personally what you believe, to look at difference in its broadest sense. And I'm talking there about ethnic, gender, which is still there. After all these years, gender still is an issue. We don't have equal pay in the world. Girls and boys are treated differently in schools. We have been working with this for many, many, many years, and we still are not there. We now have a group of, particularly in Western democracies, of white working class boys who are seriously marginalized by our system. We have got to do something with that. I'll come back to that in a second. We're talking about disability and ability. We're talking about sexuality, which still, particularly in countries with predominantly Catholic ethoses and school systems where the Catholic Church have a very strong presence, as in 95.7% of our schools are under the control of our Catholic Church, which is a very different situation, I think, to here. But sexuality, we still don't talk about it. Shh. Say nothing. Indigenous cultures, we don't like that. We don't like gypsies sometimes, or travellers, as we have our version of them, because they're not like us. And they challenge many of our norms. Anyway, we keep going. But we have to do it, yes, in books. We do need to have a doctor who's a woman. We do need, and we have all of those. We fixed our textbooks. But I just have a very quick story. I was 40 years old, and I was in a school, and I was looking at a history book. I was in the inspectorate at the time. I was looking at a history book in the library from World War I. And I saw a picture of a black soldier. And I never saw a picture of a black soldier from World War I before. I never even thought that there were black soldiers in the war. It just never entered my head. It was never part of what I saw. It was never part of the books I read, the things I saw. It just wasn't there. And I remember saying, you're 40, you should know this. But that's what happens. We close things out. Anyway, so difference, yes. And then exclusion. And I think there's a couple of things I want to talk about from a practice point of view in relation to exclusion. You tell me, how am I doing time? Left? Okay. I need to go quicker. Okay. Now I have to speed up. Okay. A couple of things we do in relation to exclusion. One of the things is individualizing failure. Failure becomes the problem of the student, not the system. I think you may have said something like that this morning about certain types of children, or yes, quality and inclusion. It's about everyone. You need to have everybody involved in it. But the whole notion here is, if somebody fails, we did nothing wrong. Now, it's not quite that stark, but we tend to either fix the child on an individual basis and leave the system alone, and that's something we need to think about. Deficit thinking is a huge problem. In my view, I should have had that as number one. Deficit thinking means that the particular difference is lacking. There's something, the difference means that you don't have something, so that means that we have to try and fix that. And finally, this is something I think that's really important, especially in special education, where the special education need, or their colour, or their sexuality, or their gender, becomes it essentializes them. By that means, it means everything becomes about their dyslexia. Everything becomes about the fact they're a girl, or they're black, or they're a gay boy, or whatever. Everything becomes about that. And we forget about the rest of the child. And that's a problem. Because by doing that, we exclude so much of the person from what we're talking about. So I'm going to have to go faster now. So, just one word of caution before we change the world. Schools cannot do it on their own. You know, the school system is only part of an overall system. But I would say, having said that and recognizing that, because sometimes teachers can feel, oh, it's all my fault, it's all my problem, I have to fix everything. No, I'm not saying that. I am saying that schools, number one, need to become part of the solution. That is absolute. But also, we also have to recognize, whether we like it or not, that schools are part of an overall state apparatus. There's a bit of Marxism coming out here. I'm sorry for those who find Marxism offensive. He was right sometimes. Schools are part of an overall state apparatus that function to produce patterns of privileges in society, whether we like it or not. Our school system does that. And that's uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable to be working in a system that does that, but that's what it does. And until we change it, it will continue to do that. And also, just one thing about the norm. The role that schools plays in policing a norm and creating binaries around normal and abnormal are quite stark. So we need to just be mindful of that. And that poor person running in that direction in a school, we know exactly what happens to them. Get back here. You cannot do that. You cannot wear that red jumper and stand in line with everybody else. And that's probably a bit. Now, I'm not going to go through all this because there's a couple of things I want to say about the norm. Is that there is a notion that we need to have a center, a kind of a mythical norm. As I said already, that norm is different in so many ways, but we need a sense of this is core for a cohesive system. But however, when that cohesive system privileges the same groups all the time, then there's something wrong with it, because it's a cohesive system that suits just some. Now I'm going to have to go very quickly. So just in terms of difference, I'm going to just do the headings here because I don't have time. Gender still is a problem. And there are still some fundamental traditional views in relation to gender and how particular genders should participate in education. They're still there. Sexuality, I've already gone through that. There is an issue, just one point there in relation to that. There is so much research now to indicate very strongly that children and young people, particularly older children and young people, who identify as LGBT or transgender are at a much greater risk of self-harm, suicide, underachievement, serious mental health issues, early school leaving, and bullying of all kinds. That's a particularly stark, worrying situation for a group of children and young people. Special education needs, I've talked about that already. It often means exclusionary. The whole notion of needs sometimes means dependency. Most of you have already read some work about that. But one of the notions is fixing the child. And race and religion, which is quite an issue certainly in Ireland. Now this is why if I get nothing else said today, I'm going to say this, because I think it's really important for us to recognize identity as a mosaic. So I'm just going to go on one slide and I'll come back. There's a concept in sociology called intersectionality. It's just a big word that means that people are made up of many, many different components when you're talking about identity. I kind of alluded to it earlier. But I think in schools we are not good at dealing with this complex multiplicity of differences. And I think that is one thing going forward in terms of inclusion we have to take on board in a much more explicated way, in a much more explicit way. We have to take on the fact that marginalization is multiplicative. So it's not just that it's a boy with a learning difficulty from a poor background, that it's one plus the other plus the other. It multiplies. It's boy multiplied by poor background multiplied by learning difficulty. They compound each other, and they create a very complicated, layered child that sits in front of us. And we have to recognize that we need to look at our students, our children and young people, from all of these multiple lenses, multiple identities, and recognize that if they have dyslexia, they're still a child. If they're black or they're gay or they're Muslim with particular ways of who want to pray at particular times, and our school goes. This happens in Ireland quite a lot, because if Muslim children and Muslim students want to pray at certain times, following their religion, our system seems to be very close to that. But yet, at 12 o'clock in our Catholic schools, everybody stops and goes, and that's okay. But at a different time, a Muslim child wants to leave the room quietly to pray. Okay, so what I want to just say here, the notion of this single axis framework operating is a problem. Seeing just one bit. And I suppose that's my core idea. Where am I going here? That's my core notion here, that we need to see all the bits. And we're big enough as a system. We're big enough as a school. We have enough people with ideas. Our teachers are clever enough. They have enough, and we do have teachers who have tremendous intellectual capacity. Bigger than maybe we're using. Let's use it a little bit more. Let's bring it, be a bit more inquisitive. Ask more questions. Be a bit more all-rounded. Be a bit more ask more questions. Ask harder questions. Ask these guys that were here today. It was very interesting to look at all the money you're spending on grants and diversity and bringing different students in. But ministries need to be asked harder questions around the system that they preside over too. Because the political response, education is political. Decisions around education are very political. So that's kind of the last thing I'm going to say. I probably should be the last thing, should it? Yeah? I'm out of time, I think. No? I think teachers here, for me, teachers are really important. And that's why teacher education and everything we do in teacher education is really important. And that's why any professional development or master's programs we do with teachers, we have to make sure that we get teachers to realize the kind of power they have. I remember being at a conference in America, the American Education Research Association conference, and this guy said to us, "You got the power, use it." And I thought, you're right, we do. We have huge power as teachers in front of students. We have those of us who are teacher educators have huge power when we teach the future teachers of our countries to actually make differences and to get teachers to a level of thinking where they really do think and ask and push boundaries. I think it's in here again, back to the soul of the teacher, is where the battle will be won. And part of that too is the leaders that lead them in schools. And I think that's what school leaders need to do. They need to get to the teachers with this. And that's what teachers need to do as leaders within their own field. So I'm just going to flick for a second, because there is a way forward, another way forward. Most recently, anyone here in early childhood? Anybody here in the early childhood sector? Littlies, kindergarten. Yeah, you know this? Reggio Emilio? It's Italian. Some things Italian are good. That is not funny. I really do think that all our systems, that this is unfortunate that Reggio Emilio has been kept a secret in the early childhood sector. It has tremendous power as a philosophy to really look at inclusion and help us think to inclusion, think through inclusion, and help us make inclusion happen in schools. I just think it is. I have been in Italy. I was in a class with little guys who were 3 and 4, and I watched them rule their world. I watched them control their learning for things they were interested in. They worked from where they were coming from. They worked together in ways I have never seen. And I taught little infants, so I've taught these small kids. I saw them bringing in their lunch with real plates and real cups, not plastic ones. And they didn't break anything. Because the first thing I would have done is, oh, give me that, it's too heavy. Just, lift it for them. Or give them a plastic plate, because that's what kids do. They break everything. They actually don't. We don't trust our children half enough. They would actually run the schools sometimes, mini schools, maybe not the little ones, but certainly primary. You talk to a 10-year-old primary student, they would probably run the school better than we would. And we don't ask them enough. And certainly when you get to second level kids, there's such a resource in secondary schools, our students, that we just let sit there. We should just trust them and go after that. The power in the student group is tremendous. I've seen it happen. But you look at Reggio Emilia and you go, wow, they can do this. Let them at it. Get out of their way, I say. Get out of the way and let them at it. So there's just a few principles that I want to just take. The red points here, because they're red for a reason. The image of the child in Reggio Emilia is a child that is full of ideas, not full of needs. I think that's very powerful. The environment as a third teacher, if we ever needed that, we need it now. I am not sure we are teaching our children and young people how to live in their world. We need the environment, what's around the child. They need to, like that was Freire's idea, they need to read their world. They need to understand their world, and that starts from understanding what's around them. So the notion of the environment of the third teacher is really powerful. Relationships are key. That's what I said at the start, here. If you don't like children, don't teach them. Go away, do something else. There are some people in schools teaching who don't like kids. Go away, please, before you do any more damage. And if you are in a teacher education situation and you're not sure whether you like children or not, get out for a while until you figure that out, because that's core. And it isn't that you want to be their best friend, because they have enough of those, and they don't want us, because we're big. But you do have to like them. And boy, do you have to enjoy them. And have to be able to laugh at them. Because with them. Collaboration, working together. What the world needs now. What a mess. A verbal and visual trace, which I really like. So when we keep records, we don't have to be filling in boxes and pages. They're much different records. They're meaningful records that relate to the child and relate to your pedagogy as a teacher. Not some bureaucratic thing that you've got to fill in because somebody's coming to check you. You come from the child, you go with the child. Making flexible plans, because plans don't work. So that's why they have to be flexible, and we all know that. This I love. This is an Italian word that I don't know if there's. It's this notion of provoking children. It's like annoying them a little bit to ask more questions, which I really like. And for me, language is so important. It's the notion of recognizing 100 languages of children. That's what the principle is. But it's the multiplicity of how children and young people express themselves. They just don't do it on a page. They draw beautifully. They can sing beautifully. They can express themselves with a paintbrush and a crayon. They can give them a camera. I did this once with a group of children, gave them a camera and say, take photographs of the most important things in the school to you. And they will, because they've got cameras themselves now, so they don't have to give them the cameras. Take out your phones and take photographs. But this was going back a while. And what they came up with was a different school. They see the school from their eyes. And then it helps you as a school leader or a school teacher to say, well, I must fix that a little bit more, or I must make sure they like sitting in that corner. Let's get nice seats in there and, you know, make that a little bit more comfortable, or make sure that there's a heater or a radiator turned on there so that when at least it's warm when they're sitting there, if that's where they want to sit. Or some kids want to go into, they don't want to play football. They don't want to run in the yard, they just want to sit. They like to sit and talk. Find a place for them where they can sit and talk. So, I think in terms of inclusion, there's no better place to start than, or finish rather, than to say, I think the 100 languages of children and the need for us to begin to recognize some of that 100 words or 100 languages might be a good place to finish. And in doing that, we open up our systems to more inclusive ways of thinking. And then we leave it at, that's the end as well. So there you are. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gerry, for this wonderful presentation, inspiring and absolutely great. And if there are any questions now, we can use any presentation.
We have one question. Except from you. No question from you. Oh, Mike.
En primer lugar, agradecer al profesor Gerry la charla que nos acaba de dar, la evolución que ha habido desde tanto conceptual, actitudinal, como de la propia práctica en relación a los términos utilizados desde las necesidades educativas especiales hasta la diversidad, y también cómo nos ha mostrado pues las condiciones necesarias para que en realidad la inclusión se lleve a la práctica, entendida como la incorporación de cualquier persona independientemente de sus características en las aulas.
Wants to thank you for your presentation, a wonderful presentation, and she highlights the idea that you translated of the evolution of the concepts of from the concepts, the attitude and the practice of inclusion, and how terms have changed from the special educations to inclusion, to diversity, and how everything has been changed and how it has been implemented or should be implemented at schools.
Pero bien, como él ha dicho, es muy difícil trasladar todo eso a los centros educativos donde están los niños y las niñas, y en ese sentido, y también como él ha referido, el profesorado es un elemento fundamental. Mi pregunta va de la siguiente, o es la siguiente. Aquí en España, en un principio, la formación del profesorado estaba dividida para niños normales, para niños con dificultades. Llevamos unos años intentando que esa formación esté unificada, es decir, se les forma a los profesores de primaria y de infantil para atender a la diversidad, a todas las diversidades, pero aún así es complicado. Me gustaría saber y conocer, por una parte, cómo es la formación que reciben los maestros en su país, y también cuál es la formación, o si los directivos, el equipo directivo, tiene una formación específica para atender a la diversidad, porque también entiendo que es un elemento fundamental en los centros.
Okay, well, now she says that it is pretty difficult to move all these things to schools, that as you mentioned, teachers are an essential key, essential part in this, and that here in Spain, traditionally we've been teaching what we can call normal kids on the one hand, and then the rest of the kids, and then we trained teachers to teach this in a separate way.
Yeah.
Now things have changed. Now we're making all the efforts to train all the teachers in the same way so that they can teach all the kids with an inclusive methodology. But the question is a double question. How you do this training of teachers at universities in Ireland? And the second question is how you do this in-service training for the staff, especially for the heads of schools or people who have a relevant position.
Going for this, yeah? Okay. Yes, I think one of the, in our initial teacher education, we work, I think, hold on, I'll start this again. We have changed in our fundamental principles around how we teach. We went through a kind of take the children out to special teachers. We went through take the children out some of the time, go into the classroom, work with other teachers. We have now moved to, and we have had teachers who were special education teachers. We still have those, but we have changed what we like schools to do now to a much more team teaching approach. So in good schools, there is an awful lot more shared teaching going on. There are an awful lot more, very few children are taken out of a class now with a special teacher. They are working with their peers, and the special teacher is in the class, or the classroom assistant is in the class, and it all happens in the one room. Like, I always thought that saying, okay, can you come with me, and can you come with me now? Take the two of you with me. No, I'm only messing. Take the two of you out in front of everybody. Come on, we're going. I'm taking you out now for your reading. In front of everyone. So every day you're reminded that you have a problem with reading because the teacher comes and takes you out. Kids know kids have problems, but there's something about working together in a class where you keep that together. So we've moved in that direction. Yes, I think our ministry, sometimes they do good things, but they have actually invested for many, many years in training special education teachers, but we are now training them, or educating them rather, as inclusion workers, as inclusion leaders in school, and a big part of their work now is helping other teachers. So they're teacher leaders with respect to inclusive practices in schools. Some are better than it, like everything. You've got some really good practice, and we have some practice that's still old-fashioned. But the direction is moving towards a much more shared responsibility for all of the children that you teach. And that's a fundamental shift in thinking. And that has happened. And actually, this is the first time I have seen a policy articulated so well and so clearly. I'll send you the policy. So I'll send it to Jose, and you can see it is the first time I have seen a philosophy under a policy that makes sense, and that schools are going initially, because it's changed, they're going, oh no, stop, you're changing it again, and then they kind of go, hold on a second here, this is different, and they're saying, okay, this is worth a try, and schools are trying it. So if that answers your question, I think that's where we're going. Thank you for the question.
Bueno, quizás no sea necesario por lo que veo, pero te traduzco la respuesta. La idea es que han cambiado los principios en cuanto a cómo trabajar con esos alumnos. En un principio todos los niños iban fuera de la clase, como os he dicho antes. Después empezó algún tiempo, como ocurrió aquí, porque algunas veces estaban fuera y otras dentro. Algunos centros todavía, pues el profesor de educación especial se los lleva fuera del aula, aunque la tendencia y lo que él quiere en particular es que haya ese team teaching, un enfoque de trabajo colaborativo entre el profesorado. Por otro lado, los buenos centros, digamos, lo que hacen es compartir, y muy pocos son los profesores que sacan a los alumnos fuera del aula. Los profesores de educación especial pueden estar dentro del aula trabajando con los alumnos, que esa sería lo principal, digamos la base. Lo terrible es cuando comenta esos casos en los que delante del resto de los alumnos, y lo he escenificado aquí, pues se dice a ti y a tal niño porque tiene que salir del aula con la vergüenza de lo que puede provocar en ellos, ¿no? La idea es trabajar juntos, ha repetido, y dice que el Ministerio ha invertido bastante dinero en este tipo de cosas, en los trabajadores sociales, en trabajar la inclusión y el liderazgo en el centro. Aún así hay todavía centros que están muy anticuados en este sentido, mientras que la tendencia es cada vez más pues repartir esa filosofía, esa idea que ha compartido antes. Y además, y ha sido quizás lo último y puede ser muy importante, que es la primera vez que él ve en la legislación que tienen actualmente y que ha quedado comprometido en enviártela, la política que hay, que está muy bien estructurada sobre cómo trabajar todo esto. Any other question? ¿Más preguntas? ¿Alguna pregunta? Sí, pues another one here.
Yes? Hi. Maria. Okay. Okay, this works.
About assessment, but I will speak in Spanish.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
Okay, assessment, fine.
Me gustaría si tú me pudieras dar un ejemplo práctico o más de tu experiencia relacionado con esta evaluación diferente. Ya diste una respuesta, trabajar colaborativamente con profesores para poder trabajar en la diversidad. Entonces, eso me gustaría, si tú me podrías dar un ejemplo concreto de una evaluación diferente, trabajando en un curso con una educación inclusiva, porque en mi país es tremendamente complicado, lo estamos trabajando, pero ha sido muy, muy difícil el tema de la evaluación. Eso.
Some of that I understood, but just give me...
Well, she wants to know, our colleague from Chile wants to know something regarding evaluation, assessment, and she needs a practical example of how to evaluate in different ways. When we talk about the same level, she says that they have huge problems in Chile to have a concept of evaluation in these terms.
Yeah, and I think, sorry. Okay, I think we have many issues with assessment everywhere. I think one of the biggest problems with assessment is the neoliberal world that wants evidence, 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 and standardized measures so that we do the same test with everyone so we can count the children and see how many are above average, how many are below average. I think that assessment form is unfortunate. It's there, but that's one thing that ministries want, and PISA wants, and the OECD want, all this big data about our children. Unfortunately, if we let that big data influence how we teach our children, then we have we end up with a very narrow curriculum, which is really problematic. So in terms of assessment, we have many ways of assessing children, but very often we have to schools need to devise their own assessments. They need to argue for a broader range of assessments based not just on science and numeracy and literacy, but creative assessments of creativity, recognizing teachers' ongoing assessment that they do every single day. That is really important. The person who can assess the child best, usually, if they're effective as a teacher, is the teacher who watches everything they do in sport, in music, in art, in languages, in maths. And their voice is really important. So a system that disregards a teacher voice in assessment and student observation is very problematic. So I would argue, I'm not sure if I have got the angle on the question. Unfortunately, the world we now live in has created this need to perform for the world. So we need to find out, particularly with PISA. Are Chile in PISA? They are, aren't they? Chile, they do PISA. Yeah, which is a very problematic, it's a very problematic idea, and it creates winners and losers immediately, and there's always going to be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 1 will change. Finland, it will change, and somebody else will be number 1, and then it's like the football league. Real Madrid, they're up, they're down. Very often up, I know, but sometimes they're not. So it's a crazy system. I think we need to look at assessment in a much broader way. And if we don't do that within our schools, within particular types of schools, with different types of student, we should integrate our assessment fundamentally into how we teach. I think that's the essence of formative assessment that's supported by a diverse range of summative assessment types. If we rely on one, there's so much evidence out there to say if you just do standardized testing, you will end up with a standardized curriculum which will not suit all our children. And that's the bottom line. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry, you have to now answer it.
Bueno, con respecto a la pregunta, que quizás era un poco genérica, dice Gerry que hay muchos aspectos que tienen que ver con la evaluación, que el mundo neoliberal en el que nos movemos, pues lo que quiere son estándares y sobre todo evidencias, ¿no? Y nosotros de estándares entendemos también bastante, ¿no? Se busca alumnos que estén por debajo de la media o que estén por encima de la media, y siempre esa es la preocupación principal, ¿no? Y eso es lo que los ministerios y especialmente pues los datos de PISA son lo que nos están llevando, ¿no? Ese Big Data del que hablaba, que dice que no podemos dejar que afecte la manera en la que tratamos o enseñamos a nuestros alumnos y, por tanto, la manera en la que los evaluamos, ¿no? Y, sin embargo, somos un poco víctimas de esto, ¿no? Los colegios, decía, por otro lado, necesitan un rango mayor, un rango más amplio de evaluación del que ahora mismo tienen. Y no solamente lo que sería un concepto de literacy, numeracy, o sea, las letras y la ciencia un poco, ¿no? La matemática, la lengua, sino muchas otras cosas, como comentaba también antes, ¿no? La persona que puede evaluar a un niño es el profesor, quien lo está viendo a diario, quien tiene la información a diario y puede hablar sobre él. La voz de los profesores es clave y a la vez puede ser también problemática en este sentido. El mundo ha creado la necesidad de alcanzar estándares y crea ganadores y perdedores, y hemos creado pues números quizás, ¿no? Como una liga de fútbol, lo comparaba con el Real Madrid del primero y el resto después, ¿no? Y bueno, quizás acaba con el tema de ver la evaluación desde una perspectiva mucho más amplia, que no sea esa perspectiva que decíamos antes, llevada por ese pensamiento neoliberal, como comentaba, y el integrar, también importante, la evaluación en la manera en la que enseñamos. Muy bien, pues son las 12. I think we have now the chance of thanking again Professor Gerry McCoy for coming today.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you.
¿Un anuncio? Tenemos un pequeño anuncio.
Otro tema de intendencia es recordar que ahora mismo vamos a proceder a las mesas de comunicaciones. En la entrada tienen ustedes un cartel inmenso en el cual viene señalado